All right.
Okay,
So what's going on?
cool. Hey, I really enjoyed Prime Vintage, man. Thanks for taking a minute out to talk about it.
Thanks. Yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've already had it on the show. So before we get into this new album, which kind of seems like we're heralding in kind of a new era because of everything that we went through with the pandemic, how did you survive that 3 years, and how has it changed you?
Uh, yeah, there I remember one thing in particular that really stood out to me in terms of uh playing and performing. It was in the I believe it was in the summer of 2020. So, we all like everything kind of broke down there in the spring. But there's this joint that in Indianapolis called it's called the Chatterbox,
Yeah,
and it's like the jazz spot uh, for locals, and like a lot of guys are down there. Jazz musicians are experimenting, and it's a really cool spot. Anyway, they were too small to open. Even later, they were too small. But what they did do is they started to close down that street, which is Massachusetts Avenue, and we would advertise uh, bring a a lawn chair and set up down there, and we'd play like in the early evening before it got dark, and we would basically busk on Mass Ave there in front
yeah,
of the chat box. And it had been a while since any of us had played, and it was really a meaningful and cathartic moment, to kind of be able to do that again and
yeah,
have that experience. And that sustained me actually for a while, because there wasn't a lot of playing uh, for
yeah,
about a year and a half or so.
yeah. So this album, how does this album feel to have this come out?
Well, it feels good. I mean, this is really I've been on a number of releases uh, over the years, but this is the first one that's got my face on the front, and they're my tunes, and I'm making all the decisions and everything. So and this is in terms of where I am in my life, this is relatively late. I would have thought I would have been able to accomplish something like this a little bit sooner.
Yeah,
So, but it's really meaningful, to put something out there that I feel like it's a statement about my values and what I care about, and just about music and how I feel music can impact all of this, how it impacts me.
yeah. Well, what are you hoping the listener gets from this album?
Whatever a listener is going to take away, it's kind of like not my business. I mean, what I'm trying to communicate is a, a certain amount of tunefulness. There's a number of the tunes on the record that really that was my focus, was just to create something that is memorable in its melody and has a certain simplicity to it. And other parts of the record are like, sort of a reaction, my reaction to some recordings by artists that have really impacted me and influenced how I think about music. And I'm trying to, reference that feeling.
Yeah.
So,
So
my hope is that the listener somehow recognizes those two elements, and it impacts them, in whatever way that they experience music.
And speaking of that feeling, jazz is the ultimate feeling. How did this journey begin for you? Where were you born and raised, and kind of how did you get into it?
Yeah, I was born in Pittsburgh, just north of Pittsburgh, PA, and uh, I started playing piano probably when I was 4 or 5. And really, the only reason why I started doing that was because I had an older brother and he did that, and I wanted to do anything he wanted to do, you know. But he didn't take to it so much, and I really enjoyed it. So um, I stuck with it, and it was probably maybe seventh or eighth grade, I guess. I was about 13 or so. I had a friend, and he had an older brother who was actually much older, who had an extensive record collection. And I had noticed that we're talking about the mid 80s. I'm listening to the radio. I'm not finding a whole lot of piano on the radio. But in this record collection, there were a bunch of jazz records, and I could always find a piano on there. And there are other things that I like too, like drum sets and saxophones. And it was this fascinating mix of colors and complexity. And I just I couldn't turn away from it. So at that point, I think the die was set, and I was interested in jazz.
What was the first live show, jazz show you saw that blew you away?
I saw David Sanborn it was probably like in 85. It was with um Hiram Bullock and Marcus Miller and Hamish Stewart was singing. They did a great blues number, and I forget the keyboardist's name. It's just on the tip of my tongue. But that show was amazing, and he later released an album of that tour, and it's still like, I put that record on, and it takes me back to being at the Syria Mosque in Pittsburgh, PA in the mid 80s. That
Right
one
on.
really was impactful.
That's cool, man. So, of all of the adventures that you've had in jazz, what do you like the best about being a professional musician? What is it that gives you the most motivation?
You know, after everything it takes to get to the gig and set everything up, and then you get to connect. That's the part, like where you're with the musicians in the band, and you're connecting with them, and you're trying to make all of that connect to the people that are in the room. And when all of those things are happening all at the same time, it's really the kind of experience that's the kind of thing I want to have, like, over and over and over again. If I
Yeah.
can make that happen on every gig, that's a win.
Yeah. So, why do you love jazz?
It was something that allowed me to explore. I could. It wasn't something that was set in stone where I was confined to a certain set of notes or a certain form, as I found in like the classical lessons that I was taking. So early on, like, I started to experiment, and I would come up with these tunes. Little It wasn't really even a tune, it was just kind of a ditty or a rhythm or something that I thought was interesting, and I would play those for my teacher. And there was no way that this was jazz, but she said, "Oh, that's jazz." I think just because I was improvising and making something up. So, that was also something that I think made me look out for jazz. Like, if I'm doing something that reminds my teacher of this thing, maybe I should go check that out.
So, if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and witness a show with your own very eyes, where are you going to go? What show would you love to see?
I would like to see Coltrane live at Birdland. That's what I would like to see. If I
Yeah,
could be in the room for that,
that would be
that would
amazing.
sure
Yeah.
would.
So, everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, but you ultimately are in charge. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
I think I'm changing, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, I have a number of different interests, and this is something that I've noticed maybe in the last even 5 or 6 years. But it started like when I started playing organ, which was really late, like in 2009 or so. So I was already 40 before I started playing organ. I'd been a piano player only up until that point. And so I took that on, and that was a revelation. All of the color and the expressiveness of that instrument. And recently I started studying tabla, which, here I'm coming to something as a complete newcomer. I have no background in this thing. At least going from piano to organ, like the keys are arranged in the
Yeah.
same way, right? I mean, that was something that I could use something that I had already worked on and knew, even though the methods were completely different. But now I'm in a totally different situation. And I recently bought a synth. I got one of those an all analog path synth with a bunch of knobs on it. I'm interested in that in ways that I never have been before. So, it's an interesting time for me, changing, trying to expand what it is that I'm interested in and the kinds of things that I do.
So if anyone wants to pick up the brand new album, learn anything about your shows, anything previous work, where can they go? Where's the best place?
The record, probably the easiest place to buy it, as far as I know, is on Bandcamp.
Yeah.
I recently did put it on. I used a service called DistroKid to put it on a bunch of streaming services. So I'm not sure how all of that end of it works at this point. That's a relatively new thing for me. But definitely, if you want to download either the individual tracks or the record as a whole, you can do that at Bandcamp, or you can send me a message on there. You can also find me on YouTube and other social media and send me a message if you're interested in a hard copy. I still have a few of those left that I'd be happy to send.
Cool. Steve, thank you so much for the music. Thank you for opening up. I appreciate it, man.
Thank you so much for the time and for checking out the record, and I appreciate you.
Absolutely.